Chapter 1471. Tang Wuling could only look on in a slack-jawed manner. This wasn't how golden lion mastiffs were supposed to act. He didn't know exactly what had happened to this golden lion mastiff, but the simplest conclusion was that it had been forced into retreat by him. Weren't golden lion mastiffs supposed to be fearless and ruthless? Weren't they supposed to only engage in battles to the death? Why was this one fleeing the scene? On top of that, Tang Wuling noticed that as the golden lion mastiff was running away, its body was still continuing to shrink, and its aura was also becoming weaker and weaker. He cast his gaze down below to find that the entire area within a diameter of a kilometer had been severely ravaged. If it weren't for this, he would struggle to believe that the massive, adorable dog running away with its tail between its legs could be so dangerous. However, this battle instilled him with even greater confidence in his own lightning god whip as a truly formidable individual attack. Not only was it enormously powerful, it was also able to forcibly immobilize its target through electric shock. In Tang Wuling's mind, he was already beginning to consider how this soul skill could work with his other abilities. If he could utilize this soul skill well, it would undoubtedly be a brilliant asset to him. After becoming a titled Douluo, it seems that the entire world had become different. All titled Douluos could be referred to as such after attaining their ninth soul rings, but there were massive disparities between the powers of titled Douluos. To put it in simpler terms, without his suit of 4-word battle armor, his uncle teacher would be no match for him. A soul master's power was a combination of multiple factors, of which one's array of soul skills was definitely the most important. Of course, with the invention of battle armor, the gap between soul masters had been whittled down to a certain extent, but this was only a relative concept. After reviewing that previous battle, Tang Wuling had become a lot more cautious and alert. He couldn't afford to not take an opponent seriously just because he thought that they were weak. If the golden lion mastiff's attacks had been slightly more ferocious, or if he didn't possess his lightning god whip soul skill, it was very likely that he wouldn't even have gotten a chance to retaliate. Currently, he possessed a large array of abilities, including over 10 blue silver emperor soul skills, 6 golden dragon king soul skills, a spiritual domain, the 9 arts of the golden dragon, blood soul fusion skills, etc. He had already consolidated all of these skills and abilities, but in an actual battle, he often found himself unable to make use of all of them, and at times, he didn't have enough time to unleash the most suitable skills. Was there a way for him to simplify things and truly integrate all of the abilities that he possessed? In other words, would he be able to completely replace all of his current abilities with his blood soul fusion skills? This clearly wasn't going to be a simple task. It had already been very difficult for him to invent his blood soul fusion skills. It was definitely going to be even more difficult to integrate more abilities on top of that. It seemed that this was something that he would have to consider carefully, and it was a process that definitely couldn't be rushed. Thus, Tang Wuling descended onto the ground, and his soul core and dragon core quickly replenished the energy he had lost. Right at this moment, he suddenly sensed a burst of strange energy fluctuations erupted in the distance. Was this spiritual power? The spiritual fluctuations were radiating outward in a ring formation, which meant that it was being directly released from a certain point. The spiritual power clearly couldn't belong to any soul beast, so could it be that a soul master was releasing their spiritual power? Was this the power of a spiritual domain? With that in mind, Tang Wuling immediately began to rush toward the direction that the spiritual fluctuations were coming from. The more he advanced toward the source of the spiritual fluctuations, the more surprised he became as he could sense that this spiritual power was very powerful, and it seemed to be capable of devouring all things. It was as if there were a vortex that contained a black hole in the center of this spiritual power, and it was devouring all spiritual power within the general vicinity. Tang Wuling felt as if his spiritual power was struggling to break out of his body. Thankfully, he was also at the spirit domain realm, so he was able to keep his own spiritual power in check. Soon, a vast expanse of darkness appeared up ahead. Actually, instead of pure darkness, it was an extremely deep blue color, and at the core of this vast expanse of deep blue was the black hole that he had detected earlier. The closer he got to the black hole, the more his spiritual power was affected, and he had no choice but to stop. This spiritual domain was truly formidable. The surrounding plants didn't appear to be any different, but Tang Wuling couldn't sense any vitality from them. The black hole had devoured the feeble spiritual fluctuations being released by their life force, thereby completely throwing their life force energy into disarray. As such, all of these plants were destined to die. Tang Wuling then caught sight of a person who was standing right at the center of the black hole. His head was tilted up toward the heavens, and his eyes were completely black. The dark blue light was being released by none other than his eyes. There were around a dozen huge soul beasts around him, all of which were lying completely still on the ground. It was clear that their minds and souls had been shattered, as evidenced by the fact that they were still giving off life force fluctuations, but all of their signs of life had disappeared. The man was Lan Fozi. He was the one releasing the all-devouring spiritual power. Having learned from his battle against the golden lion mastiff, Tang Wuling had become more cautious and didn't immediately approach Lan Fozi. If his spiritual domain were to exceed his tolerance range, then he would also be destroyed like those soul beasts. Lan Fozi's spiritual domain was truly special. It was like a black hole that destroyed everything around it. Could his body really handle such a destructive spiritual domain? Right as this thought crossed Tang Wuling's mind, Lan Fozi abruptly shuddered before throwing up a mouthful of blood, and the blackness in his eyes faded as he slumped down onto the ground. The terrifying black hole also instantly vanished, but there was no longer any vitality within a radius of several hundred meters. Tang Wuling made his way over to Lan Fozi to discover that his aura had already become very feeble, but Tang Wuling could sense a hint of insanity within it. This feeling was rather similar to when he had undergone that crimson dragon transformation, but it was also slightly different. Did this mean that Lan Fozi had lost control earlier? He had only just met Lan Fozi not long ago, so he certainly didn't consider them to be friends, but he wasn't going to leave him either. He pressed a hand onto Lan Fozi's chest to assess his bodily condition, and his heart immediately jolted upon discovering that the meridians within Lan Fozi's body were in a far severer state of chaos than he had anticipated. To put it in simpler terms, Lan Fozi's soul power was circulating in a way that almost defied logic, but it somehow managed to continue circulating. At the same time, Tang Wuling could sense that Lan Fozi's life force energy was extremely abundant. Even though his spiritual power was slightly drained, his body was quickly repairing itself, and his spiritual power was also rapidly being replenished. In his current state, his bodily condition was no longer the main concern. Instead, it was the soul beasts that could appear at any time to prey on him. He was already unconscious, and this place was rife with soul beasts. So why hadn't he been teleported out of the Myriad Beast plane yet? Could it be due to the fact that he had just arrived on the scene? If that were the case, then that further served to prove that the Myriad Beast plane was constantly monitoring everyone. With that in mind, Tang Wuling sat down beside Lan Fozi with his legs crossed. The objective of this examination was to survive for the longest time in this plane anyway, so he was in no hurry to leave. At the same time, he was very intrigued by all of the extinct soul beasts in this plane, and battling them benefited him immensely. Perhaps it was due to the fact that all of the nearby soul beasts in the area had been scared away by Lan Fozi's earlier outburst of soul power, but no other soul beasts appeared during the next hour. During this time, Tang Wuling had inspected the soul beasts that had been slain by Lan Fozi, and there were a few that he couldn't even name, while those that he did recognize were all very powerful. After a while, he was beginning to grow rather concerned and perplexed. Judging from Lan Fozi's aura, he should have been awake already. What was going on? Chapter 1472. He's been poisoned. The beautiful silk tulip's voice suddenly rang out in Tang Wuling's mind. Poisoned? What kind of poison is this? Tang Wuling asked in his heart. The beautiful silk tulip replied, if I'm not mistaken, this should be the man-eating nightmare flower's nightmare toxins. It's not lethal, but if left untreated, the victim will continue to be unconscious until they eventually die. The toxins are what the man-eating nightmare flower uses to hunt, and it's ranked 7th among the top 10 poisons found in nature. This man is very powerful. He's already been poisoned for a very long time, yet he only just fell unconscious, and that's a testament to both his powers and will. What can we do? Can you cure him? Tang Wuling knew that the beautiful silk tulip's forte lay in its ability to cure all poisoning. The beautiful silk tulip replied in a proud manner, I am the king of all immortal plants. This nightmare toxin is indeed very potent, but it's still not enough to stop me. Take off his clothes. Nightmare toxins are able to seep into one's body through their pores, so I won't be able to draw the toxins out of his body through his clothes. You're the best. Tang Wuling praised before immediately beginning to take off Lan Fozi's clothes. After taking off Lan Fozi's outer garment, he hesitated momentarily before releasing a net of lighting that enshrouded both himself and Lan Fozi within. The entire Myriad Beast plane seemed to be under constant surveillance, so it couldn't hurt to conceal Lan Fozi's body as common etiquette. After stripping off the outer garment to reveal the clothes inside, Tang Wuling was struck by a rather strange feeling. Lan Fozi's skin was very fair and delicate, and he didn't seem to have much muscle. Having said that, his pectoral muscles were very well developed, but every other part of his body was sorely lacking in terms of muscular development. All of a sudden, Tang Wuling stopped what he was doing. There was something not right about these curves. Did you only just figure it out? The beautiful silk tulip teased with a hint of schadenfreude in his voice. No way. Tang Wuling murmured to himself. The beautiful silk tulip countered. Why not? You're very adept in disguise techniques yourself. Did you not notice that there was something off about her aura, and the fact that she's constantly giving off a faint fragrant aroma? A speechless look appeared on Tang Wuling's face. How was I supposed to know? I don't just go around sniffing people. Only someone like you who's extremely sensitive to smells would notice. What do I do now? Can the poison be cured without taking off her clothes? Never did he think that Lan Fozi was a woman, even though it hadn't been fully verified. Her figure and curves were virtually all the confirmation he needed. The beautiful silk tulip said in an amused voice, "You're not that close to her anyway, so just leave her if you don't want to save her. In any case, once the toxins reach her brain, even I won't be able to do anything, and she'll be destined to remain in a deep slumber until she dies. It's up to you whether you want to save her. Can you take off her clothes instead?" Tang Wuling asked in a gloomy manner. The beautiful silk tulip replied, "I can't do that. I've already fused as one with my lover, and I'm a man. I can't betray her by doing something like this." Tang Wuling snapped. "I'm a man as well. How did this even happen?" Regardless of how calm and steadfast he normally was, he was still at a complete loss for what to do in this current situation. Lan Fozi had proclaimed to him that he had found his true love and fallen in love with Yuna at first sight, but it turned out that this guy was a woman. She was either participating in this event as a prank or her sexual orientation was askew. In any case, there was a young woman lying before him who had been afflicted by an extremely potent poison. Thankfully, it wasn't the poison he had been afflicted by last time. Otherwise, things would be even more troublesome. "Hurry up, boss," the beautiful silk tulip goaded in a teasing voice. Tang Wuling retorted in an accusatory tone. "You could have cured me of the aphrodisiac I drank last time at the Douluo Empire, couldn't you? I don't know. Perhaps. Maybe. I might have been able to do it. But that was a good thing for you, wasn't it? As soon as I realized what was happening, I shut off my own six senses so as to not invade your privacy." The beautiful silk tulip chuckled. Tang Wuling's eyelids twitched upon hearing this. He had always thought that the beautiful silk tulip was the most reliable of his soul spirits, but it seems that he wasn't all that reliable after all. After taking a deep breath, Tang Wuling closed his eyes before releasing his spiritual power. Using only his spiritual power to detect Lan Fozi's location, he hurriedly made his way toward her before stripping off her clothes, making sure to minimize the contact between them. However, some physical contact was naturally inevitable when taking off her innermost pieces of clothing. Her skin was delicate and smooth, and she was indeed giving off a fragrant aroma. Even though his eyes were closed, he couldn't cut off his own senses of touch and smell. Tang Wuling could only chant Yuna's name over and over again in his heart. He had been able to resist Yuna to a certain extent even under the influence of the aphrodisiac wine, so he definitely possessed sufficient willpower. Even so, this was still very awkward. Finally, all Lan Fozi's clothes were stripped away, and Tang Wuling was drenched in sweat. With his current physical constitution, it was virtually impossible for him to sweat, but that was precisely what was happening. "Hurry up. You got it." The beautiful silk tulip didn't delay any further on this occasion. A large purple flower appeared behind Tang Wuling, and faint pink light shone down upon Lan Fozi. The beautiful silk tulip boasted the ability to be able to keep out and cure poisons, and under the nourishment of its aura, a series of fine red water droplets quickly appeared on the surface of Lan Fozi's skin alongside a sweet and fragrant aroma. Wow, she really did take in a lot of these toxins. Her physical constitution is truly exceptional. Her body instinctively protected her own organs so that the nightmare toxins weren't able to enter her brain. Otherwise, if her mind had been corrupted, then there would be nothing I can do. The beautiful silk tulip analyzed as he administered treatment. Tang Wuling urged, "Can you hurry up and stop rambling? We have to get her clothes back on after you're done." The beautiful silk tulip was silent for a moment before asking, "Do you remember how this strapping was tied around her chest?" "I feel like you most likely won't remember anymore." Tang Wuling's eyelids began to twitch again. Why did women have to wear so many different items of clothing? Indeed, he had completely forgotten how the strapping had been tied around her chest. Removing it had been quite troublesome, and he was trying his best not to come into contact with her body, so he didn't make an effort to remember how the strapping had been tied. "Hurry up and focus on curing the poison. Almost done now. Most of the toxins have already been expelled, and they'll naturally evaporate in the air in around 2 minutes. Don't worry about inhaling some of the toxins. I'll make sure you don't get poisoned." Tang Wuling was quite relieved to hear this. At the very least, he wouldn't have to rub down her body or something like that. That would be even more awkward. As for the strapping, he would just have to do his best. In any case, it didn't really matter whether he tied it correctly or not. After putting on her clothes for her, he would immediately run away and survey the area with his spiritual power to ensure her safety. She wouldn't know that he was the one who had saved her, and the awkwardness would be avoided. Chapter 1473. After establishing that plan, the awkwardness in his heart was significantly alleviated. Everything would be fine as long as Lan Fozi didn't find out that he was the one who had taken off and put on her clothes for her. As for the fact that she was a woman, he would just pretend to be oblivious to that. With the lightning barrier he had created, surveillance most likely wouldn't have been able to glean Lan Fozi's body. "Done," the beautiful silk tulip said. Tang Wuling reacted extremely quickly, immediately rushing over to Lan Fozi before scooping her up from the ground while picking up her strapping with his other hand. Right at this moment, he suddenly detected that something seemed to be amiss. Due to the fact that he was using his spiritual power in the place of his eyes, his senses were particularly sharp, and he could feel a fierce gust of wind blowing toward him. Slap. A vicious slap landed on Tang Wuling's face, causing him to lose his balance and tumble onto the ground, directly on top of Lan Fozi's naked body. He reflexively opened his eyes and was greeted by the sight of a pair of furious blue eyes that were virtually releasing flames. Tang Wuling's face was stinging with pain. This was the first time he had ever been slapped in the face. Lan Fozi still had a set of masculine facial features, but Tang Wuling could clearly feel an extremely supple and delicate body beneath his own, and there were a pair of soft, warm cushions pressed against his chest. Tang Wuling immediately grabbed onto Lan Fozi's wrists before she could attack any further. "Stop. I'm curing your poisoning." He pressed her wrists down onto the ground, but that only made their position even more intimate. "Get off me, you bastard." Lan Fozi was so enraged she felt as if she were about to go insane, and her body was trembling uncontrollably with shame. "All right, but don't attack me anymore. I really was saving you just now. Don't you remember how you got poisoned? If it weren't for me, you would have been unconscious forever. How can you repay my kindness with such ingratitude?" Tang Wuling hurriedly said. Lan Fozi faltered slightly upon hearing this, and her memory slowly returned to her. She recalled that she only just barely managed to escape from the man-eating nightmare flowers, but she was very heavily poisoned at that point and fled toward a random direction in a blind panic, alerting many soul beasts in the process. All of these soul beasts surrounded her, and she was forced to battle them while the toxins gradually took effect within her body. Right as she was about to be overwhelmed by the soul beasts, she finally lost control. Currently, she was in an extremely feeble state, and she could feel that she had severely overexerted her own spiritual power. Otherwise, that slap would have been a lot more powerful. However, she could also feel that the euphoric drowsy sensation had faded, so it did indeed appear that she had been cured. "Do you remember what happened now? You were poisoned by nightmare toxins that had seeped into your skin, so I had to take off your clothes to expel the toxins. I didn't do it to take advantage of you. I didn't even know you were a woman, so I certainly had no intention of doing anything to you. I discovered that you were a woman while taking off your clothes, but what was I supposed to do? Just watch you die? If you've calmed down, then I'll let you go, but don't attack me again. I don't beat women, but if you insist on attacking me, I'll have to restrain you by force." Tang Wuling had completely taken the moral high ground, and Lan Fozi panted heavily as she bit down on her lower lip and gradually calmed herself down. "All right, now get off me." Only then did Tang Wuling release her before quickly springing back and turning so that his back was facing her. He pointed at the net of lightning around them and said, "I used my martial soul to conceal the two of us, so the surveillance in this plane wouldn't have been able to see you. I had my eyes closed the entire time as well, so I didn't see anything either. Hurry up and put on your clothes now." Lan Fozi didn't respond, but Tang Wuling could hear the sound of clothes rustling behind him. He was glad that he didn't have to put on her chest strapping for her, but this situation was even more awkward. Tang Wuling grumbled in his heart. Why didn't you tell me that she would wake up so quickly? The beautiful silk tulip replied in an innocent manner. "I didn't know she would wake up this quickly either, and you didn't ask me, boss. Don't call me boss." Tang Wuling snapped internally. After a while, the sound of rustling clothes ceased. Tang Wuling had constantly been surveying the situation with his spiritual power in case Lan Fozi suddenly attacked him again. If she did that, he would immediately run away. In her current feeble state, she would only be able to muster up around 10% to 20% of her power at most, so she posed no threat to him. In any case, he hadn't done anything wrong, so he certainly didn't owe her anything. It was a good thing to save someone in a dire situation, but that slap to the face really was unwarranted. Tang Wuling couldn't help but think of the fact that even Yuna had never slapped him like this before. I'm done. Lan Fozi's cold voice rang out from behind him, and only then did he turn back around. She had already returned to her handsome masculine appearance, and there were no longer any discernible feminine traits about her. In terms of disguise skills, she was no less proficient than Tang Wuling. At this moment, she was appraising Tang Wuling with a complex expression, and her breathing was still slightly faster than normal. You better not tell anyone about this or spoil my participation in this joust for a spouse event. Otherwise, I'll kill you. Tang Wuling rolled his eyes in response. If I knew you were such an ungrateful person, I would have left you to die. Don't worry, I won't report you or anything. It's not like Yuna would fall for a woman anyway. This is where we part ways. Just pretend as if you never ran into me. He waved a hand through the air as he spoke to withdraw his lightning net, then immediately began to depart. Hey! Lan Fozi called out in an urgent voice. What? Tang Wuling turned around again. A slightly awkward look appeared on Lan Fozi's face, and she said, I'm currently very feeble. Can you protect me until I recover before you leave? Tang Wuling rolled his eyes in response. If your life comes under threat, you'll be teleported out of here. Then why wasn't I teleported out of here earlier? Lan Fozi countered with a gloomy expression. Tang Wuling faltered slightly upon hearing this. Indeed, why hadn't she been teleported away earlier? Could it be that poisoning didn't count? A cold look appeared on Lan Fozi's face as she said, if you don't want to, then you can leave. Tang Wuling replied, so this is how you beg people for favors. Fine, I'm leaving now. Hey, don't actually leave. Lan Fozi hurriedly rushed over to him, but she was still in a very feeble state, so she tripped over her own feet and began to fall toward Tang Wuling. Tang Wuling stepped away to avoid her before laying a hand onto her shoulder to help her back up into a standing position. Don't you have any chivalry? Lan Fozi's breathing quickened even further, and her face also turned quite pale. Tang Wuling retorted, who says I'm a chivalrous man? Even if I were, I wouldn't waste my chivalry on someone so ungrateful. Tang Wuling pointed at his own face as he spoke, and his cheek was still stinging from the earlier slap. Lan Fozi blushed slightly upon hearing this. Don't be so petty. How was I supposed to know you were helping me in that situation? Tang Wuling sighed. Fine, I'll stay here while you recover. After you're done, we'll part ways and pretend we never met each other here. He made his way over to a patch of flat ground as he spoke, then sat down with his legs crossed and closed his eyes. Even though he had done nothing wrong, he had indeed touched and seen some things that he shouldn't have, so he was doing this to repay the favor that he owed her. Lan Fozi really wanted to give Tang Wuling a beating at the sight of his disdainful expression, but she knew that she would only be making a fool out of herself in her current state. Thus, she gritted her teeth and also sat down on the ground with her eyes closed as she began to cultivate. Chapter 1474. Even though Tang Wuling had his eyes closed, he was still constantly keeping tabs on Lan Fozi, and he found it quite remarkable that her emotions were able to settle so quickly to a normal state as soon as she began cultivating, as expected of someone who was able to cultivate their spiritual power to the spirit domain realm. Furthermore, while examining Lan Fozi's bodily condition, he discovered that the riddle on which her soul power circulated was completely different to his own. As she began cultivating, Tang Wuling could clearly sense the water elements in the air converging toward her, and she also began to release spiritual power fluctuations. They were still quite feeble, but they possessed a special rhythm and seemed to be arising from a cultivation method that specifically targeted spiritual power. While cultivating her spiritual power and soul power in unison, Lan Fozi gave off a sense of balance and harmony, and it was also a display of her immense foundation. She appeared to be only slightly older than Tang Wuling, so it was very remarkable that she had been able to cultivate to this level. Judging from her eruption of power prior to falling unconscious, Tang Wuling wasn't fully confident that he would be able to defeat her in a one-on-one battle. However, she seemed to be rather lacking in battle experience, and that was most likely her most glaring weakness. As Tang Wuling cultivated, he was also keeping tabs on the changes taking place in the surrounding area. There were currently no soul beasts within the sensory range of his spiritual power, perhaps due to the fact that they had all been frightened away by Lan Fozi's terrifying outburst. Thus, 6 peaceful hours passed by. When Lan Fozi opened her eyes again, Tang Wuling immediately sensed this, and he also reopened his eyes. At this point, Lan Fozi's eyes had regained their clarity, and her aura had also returned to normal, indicating that she had most likely already recovered most of her soul power. However, her spiritual fluctuations were still not as powerful as they normally were. After rising to her feet, she cast her gaze toward Tang Wuling with a hesitant look in her eyes. Thank you. Tang Wuling waved a hand in response. Don't mention it. I'll see you around. After that, he rushed away into the forest, quickly vanishing into the undergrowth. Lan Fozi looked on at his departing figure, and she reflexively laid a hand onto her own chest, where her heart seemed to be beating slightly faster than normal. Why do I not find him as repulsive as before? Aren't all men supposed to be horrible creatures? That's what Mother told me. Tang Wuling was naturally oblivious to Lan Fozi's renewed impression of him. He was striding through the lush forest, and his mood was steadily improving as he sensed the rich life force energy in the air. Along the way, he encountered some soul beasts, but he was like a tourist, choosing mostly to appraise these soul beasts from afar. Even if a battle were to ensue, he would handle the situation with care to avoid harming the soul beasts. Meeting so many extinct soul beasts was truly a surreal and wonderful experience, and he quickly forgot all about the incident surrounding Lan Fozi. However, not long after that, he finally encountered some trouble. As he was passing through a certain area, Tang Wuling suddenly detected a powerful aura that struck him with a sense of peril. He could tell that this aura didn't belong to a human, and right as he determined this, dense vapor began to permeate through the air. Within the misty vapor, the moos of a cow began to ring out. What kind of soul beast was this? Tang Wuling slowly made his way into the mist with a hint of curiosity in his heart. Even though he was sensing a threat from that aura, he was very confident in his own abilities, so he was sure that self-preservation wouldn't be an issue. Soon, he discovered the source of the vapor. It had stemmed from a lake that only had a diameter of around 100 meters, and the lake was filled with semi-transparent green water. The misty vapor permeating throughout the area was perhaps a result of the high level of humidity here. The mooing gradually subsided, and ripples began to proliferate over the surface of the lake. It seemed that the mooing had come from the center of the lake. Tang Wuling released his spiritual power, and bluish purple light began to course over his body as he proceeded with caution. He had concealed his own aura as much as possible, and he silently hid behind a giant rock as he assessed his surroundings. All of a sudden, Tang Wuling's expression changed slightly as he could sense that the air currents in the surrounding area had sped up, but the mist had become denser. If there were winds blowing through the air, shouldn't the mist have been dispersed? Right as this thought crossed his mind, a gust of fierce wind was swept up, immediately followed by a string of loud moos. The ferocious wind suddenly began to converge toward him from all sides like a massive cage, striking him with a strong sense of asphyxiation. What was even more terrifying was that the winds were imbued with incredible power that resembled the power of space as opposed to just pure wind power. Tang Wuling immediately unleashed his ghost shadow perplexing track, trying to charge out of the gaps in the walls of wind, which he was searching for using his spiritual power. At the same time, his dragon claw thumped violently, and a layer of scales appeared over his skin. Bam! Right as he had found a gap that he could exploit, it was filled by another gust of fierce wind that crashed into his body. Tang Wuling immediately stomped his right foot down onto the ground. Unleashing his golden dragon shakes the earth amid a thunderous dragon's roar. In order to disguise his own identity, he didn't use the complete version of his golden dragon shakes the earth. In other words, he was directing its entire power into the ground, creating powerful shockwaves to counteract the ferocious winds. As a result, the pressure that he was under was significantly alleviated, and he formed a barrier for himself with his arms before propelling himself toward a certain direction. With his enormous strength, he was able to crash through the converging walls of wind. Yet just as he was about to escape, a massive azure shadow suddenly came hurtling directly toward him. Boom! Tang Wuling was sent flying like a cannonball, and he couldn't help but wonder why he had encountered so many powerful beings in this myriad beast plane. Both the golden lion mastiff from before and this unknown creature possessed strength that outstripped his own, and as a result of the clash, he was launched all the way across the lake before landing on the other side. With his dragon's repulse and tremendous physical constitution, the attack wasn't enough to hurt him, but he definitely hadn't enjoyed it either. His arms were slightly numb, and he only regained feeling within them after circulating his blood essence within his own body. Not being able to use the abilities that he was most adept in proved to be quite a handicap. If he had used golden dragon shocks the heavens during his escape, then the result would have most likely been quite different. It was very easy for him to pose as the young master of the Blue Lightning Tyrant Dragon clan, but the adopted identity was a restrictive shackle that prevented him from being able to use most of his abilities, such as many of his soul skills and his golden dragon spear. Right at this moment, an overwhelming sense of peril welled up in Tang Wuling's heart, and he immediately released his dragon wings before flapping them vigorously while rolling to the side. Chapter 1475. Boom! A mountainous black creature crashed heavily down onto the ground, causing the earth to quake violently. Tang Wuling was immediately able to identify the massive creature as an ape that was over 100 meters tall, and it had crashed down from the heavens like a meteorite. In the next instant, an enormous burst of pressure began to weigh down upon him. This was gravitational control. Tang Wuling instantly unleashed the gravitational control ability of his mountain dragon king torso bone as a countermeasure, while the giant ape leapt toward him while lashing out with its massive fists. Even with its massive body, it was able to unleash hundreds of punches in an instant, and the entire sky was filled with countless fist projections. There was no way to evade the attacks. Having been struck by this string of attacks, a sense of fury had begun to well up in Tang Wuling's heart, and he took a deep breath as he unleashed his golden dragon tyrant body, causing all of his scales to take on a mirror-like quality. Immediately thereafter, he accelerated in midair before lashing out with his right fist. Even without his golden dragon spear, he was able to unleash all or nothing with his fist, instantly injecting all of his strength, soul power, blood essence power, golden dragon king bloodline, and the lightning of his infernal lightning bind into the attack. Boom! An earth-shattering boom rang out as the giant ape's fists were stopped cold in their tracks while Tang Wuling was sent flying backward by the force of the impact. He quickly determined that he was definitely facing a soul beast above 100,000 years of age, and this was a soul beast that was of no weaker species than the golden lion mastiff. What was even more concerning to him was that this giant ape clearly wasn't the one who had unleashed the wind attacks earlier, which meant that there was a very good chance that there were two 100,000-year-old soul beasts in this place. Despite this, Tang Wuling remained calm as he released his suit of battle armor. More lightning began to course over his suit of battle armor, forming a barrier to conceal its appearance as much as possible. Hold on, but Oolong, you just entered the restricted area. We have to report this to our higher-ups right away. All of the soul beasts in the restricted area are extremely powerful, particularly the ones that are being specially nurtured, and we're unable to conduct surveillance in that area due to the chaotic energy there. I didn't think anyone would be able to make it into that area. This is going to be quite troublesome. Is there any way to directly teleport him out of there? I'm afraid not. We can't control anything within the restricted area. Let's report this matter and wait for a verdict from our higher-ups. I've just received a response from our higher-ups. If he can make it out of the restricted area, then teleport him out of there right away. If not, then this matter is to be kept strictly confidential. Yes. After donning his dragon moonsong battle armor, Tang Wuling's aura swelled drastically. He was instilled with a sense of confidence. His suit of three-word battle was able to enhance his powers to the pinnacle of the hyper Douluo level, which meant that he would be able to contend with a rank 98 hyper Douluo who wasn't wearing their suit of battle armor. The extinction of the soul beasts had truly been set into motion with the invention of battle armor, and in this perilous situation, Tang Wuling had immediately donned his suit of battle armor. Moo! The moose began to ring out once again as another gust of fierce wind swept forth. Tang Wuling was then greeted by the sight of a waterspout rising up from the surface of the lake. The waterspout was rife with wind and water elemental power, and it swept directly toward him. Tang Wuling took a deep breath, and he knew that he couldn't hide his powers any longer. He had to address this crisis, even if doing so meant that his cover would be blown. A series of bluish-purple vines erupted out of his body, and countless bolts of lightning began to appear as the surrounding air instantly became more viscous. Rumble, rumble. The bolts of bluish-purple lightning were filled with unrivaled explosive power, and they formed a dense forest that spread outward with Tang Wuling's body at the very center. This was his ninth soul skill, Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell. As soon as the infernal lightning vine appeared, it was filled with excitement. Not only did it love devouring lightning, it also loved expressing itself. The lightning that it released instantly encompassed an area with a radius of hundreds of meters, and the humid air became very dry in the face of the vast expanse of lightning. Tang Wuling's suit of three-word battle armor was frantically devouring all types of elemental particles from the air to reciprocate Tang Wuling, replenishing his energy as quickly as it could. Within the lightning, Tang Wuling could sense two enormous figures. The one behind him was the giant ape, which had already leapt back onto the shore to avoid the lightning, while the one directly in front of him was the soul beast who had first attacked him, and it had also retreated out of the forest of lightning. This was a giant python that was over 100 meters in length with azure scales all over its body, as well as a pair of giant claws beneath its abdomen. What was very strange was that it had a massive cow's head, which was the source of all the thunderous moves. Was this the legendary sky azure ball python? Did this mean that the giant ape was the true titan giant ape? One of Yuan and Yui's martial souls was the titan giant ape, but even after unleashing her martial soul true body, she was still nowhere as powerful and imposing as the true titan giant ape. Tang Wuling had heard stories about both the sky azure ball python and the titan giant ape, and these stories were related to his birth father. These two soul beasts were close friends with the founder of the Tang sect, Tang San. At the time, soul spirits hadn't been invented yet, but the two almighty soul beasts had still sacrificed themselves to become part of Tang San's power, thereby helping him to ascend to godhood in the end. Tang Wuling didn't know any further details about this story, but according to the appraisal made by Shrek Academy, if these two soul beasts were still alive, then they would definitely both claim spots among the 10 great beasts. Both of them were unique soul beasts and extremely powerful, and they would most likely rank even above their lord and myriad demon king. Never did Tang Wuling think that he would encounter these two legendary soul beasts in the myriad beast plane. Furthermore, even though he was being attacked by them, he couldn't help but feel a sense of intimacy toward them when he thought about how they had sacrificed themselves for his father. If he were facing two ordinary 100,000-year-old soul beasts, then it wouldn't be much of an issue for him to escape. But this was an entirely different story. If he continued to hold back in an effort to hide his own identity, then it would be very difficult for him to escape. Chapter 1476. The titan giant ape was forced back onto the shore by the Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell, and large patches of its fur had been charred black. The sky azure ball python had bore the brunt of the attack, but Tang Wuling had clearly seen a net of azure light rise up from its body to nullify the Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell. Even though the sky azure ball python had also shattered violently within the Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell, it clearly hadn't actually been harmed, and it slowly raised its pair of massive claws, which instantly turned an azure color. Tang Wuling could clearly sense that its claws seemed to be imbued with a very peculiar type of power, similar to the power exhibited by the golden lion mastiff after it had unleashed its domain. Was this the power of domain laws? Every domain possessed its own power of laws, and that was what made domain so powerful. The reason why three-word battle armor was considered to be such an enormous upgrade from a suit of two-word battle armor was precisely because it possessed the power of laws contained within the battle armor domain. The domains obtained by soul masters were more powerful than battle armor domains as they had a greater understanding of the power of laws contained within their own domains. For example, Tang Wuling's time reversal domain contained the power of the laws of space and time, and this type of power was exactly what Tang Wuling was currently sensing from the paws of the sky azure ball python. What kind of power of laws did it possess? Before he had a chance to ponder this matter any further, the sky azure ball python suddenly brought its claws apart in a tearing motion. Immediately thereafter, the azure light erupting from its body intertwined with Tang Wuling's Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell before both were torn apart in unison. Thus, a massive gash was torn into the Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell, following which the sky azure ball python sent its massive tail crashing directly toward Tang Wuling. This was the same thing that had sent Tang Wuling flying in the first place. Tang Wuling had only used his Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell in battle during sparring matches with his friends, and it had proven to be immensely effective every single time. This was the first time that it had ever been nullified like this, as expected of one of the most powerful soul beasts in history. Right at this moment, all of the fine hairs on the back of Tang Wuling's neck stood up on end as the titan giant ape had also sprung into action. It had crouched down to lower its center of gravity, as if it was straddling the saddle of a horse, and it slowly extended its right fist as a ball of inky black light materialized on the surface of its fist. No sound or explosive power was released by its fist, but the attack had been unleashed at the same time as the sky azure ball python had whipped its tail toward Tang Wuling. Crap. A sense of life-threatening peril immediately welled up in Tang Wulin's heart, and the surrounding air suddenly warped, following which both the Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape's attacks returned to a second ago. At the same time, Tang Wulin raised both hands in unison. The golden dragon spear appeared in his left hand, and with it, he immediately unleashed his fury of the masses toward the Sky Azure Bull Python's tail. Meanwhile, the golden trident appeared in his right hand, with which he unleashed millennium white clouds. In the face of these lethal attacks, Tang Wulin had also retaliated with his most powerful attacks. In comparison, the silent punch that the Titan Giant Ape had unleashed from the shore was far more threatening than the Sky Azure Bull Python's tail strike. Right as it had unleashed that, Tang Wulin felt as if his entire body were about to be pulverized. In contrast, Yuan and Yui's divine cloud vortex fists were like mere child's play. Clang! The golden dragon spear struck the Sky Azure Bull Python's tail, and he could feel that the spear had landed a solid blow, but its power was completely nullified as soon as it struck the giant tail. The extreme sharpness of the golden dragon spear seemed to have failed in the face of the Sky Azure Bull Python, but the Sky Azure Bull Python had also been forced back into retreat. Meanwhile, a giant fist indentation had appeared within the vast expanse of white clouds on the other side. Despite the grueling test of time, the fist indentation was still crashing directly toward Tang Wulin, reaching him in the blink of an eye. It's over. The Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape were far more fearsome than he had imagined. How had he even encountered this pair of almighty soul beasts in this place? All of a sudden, the giant fist projection stopped less than 10 meters away from Tang Wulin, and it abruptly exploded, scattering the millennium white clouds before gradually fading into nothingness, leaving Tang Wulin feeling very perplexed. The power of the Titan Giant Ape's punch clearly hadn't been nullified, so why had it suddenly stopped and disappeared? Right at this moment, a series of blue halos descended from the heavens to sweep up his body, and in the next instant, the entire world around him began to spin and blur. Just as he was about to be swept away by the blue vortex, a cold harumph rang out, and a giant azure claw pierced into the huge vortex before making a simple dragging motion to destroy it. Arg! Another figure stumbled out of the vortex alongside Tang Wulin, but was none other than Lan Fozi. Run! Lan Fozi yelled as her eyes suddenly took on a deep purple hue, and an extremely powerful aura erupted from her body. Everything in the surrounding area instantly took on an illusionary quality, and a total of 3 purple shockwaves proliferated outward in all directions from her body. Both the Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape were forced back by these 3 shockwaves, and the pressure being exerted upon Tang Wulin was instantly alleviated as a result. A bewildered look appeared on the Sky Azure Bull Python's face, and in the next instant, a slender hand had grabbed onto Tang Wulin's wrist. Lan Fozi's face was rather pale as she released another shockwave, except this one was of a purplish golden color. It only spread to a diameter of around 5 meters, but it managed to shatter the surrounding space, and she immediately dragged Tang Wulin into the shattered space. I see. A rumbling voice rang out as the nightmarish giant Azure Claw appeared once again. On this occasion, it had become even more massive, and it prevented the torn space from sealing while piercing Azure light suddenly erupted from its other claw. Both Tang Wulin and Lan Fozi were struck by a sense of dizziness, and everything around them seemed to have been caught up in an unavoidable storm of annihilation. It's over. Father. Tang Wulin called out desperately to his father. In this dire situation, only the power that his father had left within his body would be able to save them. His consciousness lingered on this thought for only an instant before everything faded into darkness. The energy fluctuations within the restricted area seemed to have subsided, yet that person hasn't emerged. He's most likely dead. Indeed. We've sent many scouts into the restricted area, but some of them had their memories wiped before they were ejected by whatever is residing in that area, while the rest didn't even make it out alive. I can only pray for their sake that they'll be released after having their memories wiped. Should we report this to the higher-ups? Hold off on that for now. This examination will be underway for quite a few more days anyway. All right, Chairman, I want to go back to cultivate now, Yuna said as she rose to her feet. Sure, go ahead, Kayangyu Dongfang said with a smile. He was in a very good mood as Kayangyu's Hangting had already completed all of his examinations with flying colors, and this was a very good beginning. Even more importantly, the influence of the Joust for a Spouse event was only continuing to increase. The viewership it was receiving had already set a federal record, and the event was very beneficial for the public image of the Spirit Pagoda. In particular, all of the rewards offered by the Spirit Pagoda had swayed public opinion heavily in its favor, and that was what Kayangyu Dongfang was most pleased about. At this rate, the Spirit Pagoda's reputation would be fully restored once the conclusion of the Joust for a Spouse event was reached, and the marriage ceremony between Kayangyu's Hangting and Yuna could be held then. After that, he would gradually shift more responsibility onto them as he prepared to hand over the reins. Chapter 1477. With that in mind, a slightly forlorn look appeared on Kayangyu Dongfang's face. If only his son was still alive. Kayangyu's Hangting's father had perished on a scouting mission in a small plane. At the time, the entire plane had collapsed, so even Kayangyu Dongfang had been powerless to save him. Kayangyu's Hangting's mother committed suicide from grief, thereby leaving Kayangyu Zanning as an orphan. This was something that had always pained Kayangyu Dongfang, and it made him even more determined to find that world. Only after reaching that level would he truly be able to govern his own fate and never have to watch anyone close to him die again. In order to achieve this goal, he was willing to make any sacrifice without any hesitation. Right as Yuna left the rostrum and was about to return to her own living quarters, her brow suddenly furrowed slightly as if she had sensed something, and she laid a hand onto her own chest. She could clearly feel the scorching heat from the golden scale in front of her chest, indicating that he was in danger. High up in the air, the massive Sky Azure Bull Python quickly shrank down to become a middle-aged man amid a flash of azure light. The middle-aged man was very burly and imposing with a head of long azure hair. He was holding Tang Wulin and Lan Fozi, one in each hand. The Titan Giant Ape also quickly shrank into a muscle-bound killer of a man, but his brows were tightly furrowed. Did I see that right? Did this kid just use the golden trident? The azure-haired man's brows were also tightly furrowed as he replied. I'm not sure. His aura is very chaotic. He possesses a dragon clan aura of a very high caliber that even has a suppressive effect on my bloodline to a certain extent. However, I'm not technically a member of the dragon clan, so the effect wasn't very pronounced. He laid Tang Wulin and Lan Fozi onto the ground as he spoke, then squatted down and quickly patted up and down Tang Wulin's body, injecting bursts of gentle azure light into his body before assessing the information reciprocated back to him. This kid's body is downright inhuman. He was struck by a direct sword of your tail but shook it off like it was nothing. In terms of physical constitution alone, he can probably match us. What a little freak. The muscular man chuckled. The aura of his golden trident was far more feeble than the one used by Tang San, but it really does possess an aura of the same nature. The azure-haired man used. On top of that, his blood essence is so abundant that he's more like a soul beast than a human. The dragon-type aura within his body is very pronounced, and there's a type of deranged aura fluctuations within his body that even I can't help but feel fearful toward. He's definitely a very strange case. Could it be that he's one of Tang San's descendants? The muscular man asked. We'll have to ask him to find out. The azure-haired man said as he patted Tang Wulin's cheek, injecting a burst of gentle azure light into his head. Tang Wulin shuddered as he gradually awakened, and as soon as he opened his eyes, he was greeted by the sight of a pair of unfamiliar, imposing men. He reflexively tried to spring to his feet, only to find that his body was completely immobilized. Who are you? Tang Wulin asked with a wary expression. The muscular man chuckled. Have you not received enough of a beating yet? If you don't want to die, then answer our questions. Tang Wulin faltered slightly upon hearing this before asking, are you the Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape? He was still alive, so all was not lost. However, what was quite perplexing to him was that the power his father had left within his body hadn't been activated, even though he was clearly in a life-threatening situation. However, the thought had only just occurred to him before he immediately repressed it. Since when had he started to rely on others? He had to become more powerful himself. His battles against Infernal King Douluo Harissa and Beast God Ditian had been extremely crushing experiences, and if it weren't for the immense willpower he had honed during his training on the demonic island, he would have most likely fallen into a depression already. So you've heard of us. We won't be able to let you leave alive now. The muscular man chuckled. At this point, Tang Wulin had already calmed down. If you wanted to kill me, then I would already be dead. You woke me up because you have something to ask me, right? Go ahead. The Sky Azure Bull Python was rather surprised to hear this. You're much more willing to cooperate than I expected. Tang Wulin replied in an indifferent manner. Why wouldn't I cooperate when the alternative would be death? Besides, I have no secrets that I can't reveal to you. I'm a human while you two are soul beasts, so my secrets won't be of any use to you anyway. The Sky Azure Bull Python chuckled. Very good. It's always a lot easier speaking to intelligent people. Tell me your name and affiliations. Tang Wulin replied. My name is Tang Wulin. I come from Shrek Academy in the Tang sect. Tang Wulin. The Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape immediately exchanged a glance upon hearing this. Which 3 characters is your name comprised of? The Titan giant ape asked in a slightly urgent manner. Tang Wulin's heart stirred slightly at the sight of his urgent display, and he replied, Tang is in Tangsan, Wu is in Xiaowu, and Lin is in Qilin. The Titan giant ape asked, you know of Tangsan and Xiaowu? Tang Wulin replied, who doesn't? Not only is Tangsan the founder of our Tang sect, both Tangsan and Xiaowu are legends of the human race. The Sky Azure Ball Python asked, how are you related to them? Tang Wulin hesitated momentarily and didn't reply right away. He had a feeling he already knew who these two men were, and if he weren't mistaken about that, then he shouldn't be in any danger anymore. Right as he was about to reply, the entire space suddenly warped slightly. The Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape looked up in unison, just in time to see a beam of silver light descend from the heavens, accompanied by a deep, rumbling voice. I'm taking this man with me. As soon as the voice trailed off, a rift suddenly appeared in the air, following which a giant silver claw appeared before reaching downward. A beam of silver light instantly appeared around Tang Wulin, enveloping his entire body. Stop! The Sky Azure Ball Python yelled as he instantly rose up into the air, unleashing a giant azure claw to oppose the silver claw. The entire space trembled violently, and rainbow light rippled forth from the surface of the silver claw, gradually overwhelming the azure light being released by the claw of the Sky Azure Ball Python. The Titan giant ape harumphed coldly as he reverted back to his massive ape form before launching a fist upward. It was none other than the same attack that Tang Wulin had been completely powerless against earlier. Chapter 1478. The light radiating from the silver claw suddenly brightened even further, and a hint of anger crept into the deep, rumbling voice. I'm collaborating with you, but that doesn't mean I'll conform to you. Dazzling silver light erupted forth, and all of the water in the entire lake down below instantly erupted upward. The silver claw swept through the air thrice in succession, and the entire space was suddenly on the verge of cracking. The Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape were already resisting with all their might, but they were still repressed by the silver claw, and Tang Wulin instantly vanished amid a flash of silver light. Both the Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape reverted back into their human forms and descended onto the shore with extremely dark expressions. The Sky Azure Ball Python grumbled, what an unreasonable bastard. We didn't even get to find out if that kid had anything to do with Tangsan. If he hadn't been lying about his name, then it's remarkably similar to Tang Wutong. I recall Tangsan said that the name Tang Wutong bore the meaning of Tangsan and Xiaowu's little phoenix. Wouldn't that mean that the kid's name entails Tangsan and Xiaowu's little Qilin? But he doesn't look like Tangsan and Xiaowu at all. Are you an idiot? Could you not see that he was in disguise? The Sky Azure Ball Python snapped. If he hadn't been taken away, we would have had a whole host of ways to verify his identity. That attack he unleashed with the golden trident was very rudimentary, but it was rather similar to Tangsan's Millennium White Clouds, so there really is a very good chance that they're related. If he really is Tangsan and Xiaowu's son, then we have to protect him at all costs. He's our only lead to finding the divine realm. What do we do? Should we leave this place? The Titan giant ape asked. A hesitant look appeared in the Sky Azure Ball Python's eyes. We agreed to stay here to oversee all of the revived soul beast seeds in his stead. If we both leave, then something could go wrong during our absence. You go find him, and I'll stay here. Once you track him down, make sure to protect him at all costs, and establish a mark on his body. That way, we'll be able to appear by his side at a moment's notice. All right, but what do we do with that kid? The Titan giant ape asked as he pointed at the unconscious Lan Fozi. Get him out of here. He risked his life to save Tang Wulin, so they should be good friends. Once we throw him out of here, he should automatically be teleported away. Silver light flashed, and Tang Wulin regained his mobility again, while his soul power and blood essence also resumed normal circulation. On this occasion, he had seen the giant silver claw in person, and it was just like how his friends had described it to be. What type of creature did that silver claw belong to? It had saved his friends in the Great Star Dou Forest, and just now, it had saved him from the Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape in that small plane. This was very strange. He felt like there were some leads that he could follow, but he couldn't quite place his finger on them. All of a sudden, the silver light around him vanished, and he found himself situated at the entrance to the myriad beast plane. He was rather taken aback by this, and he was quickly surrounded by a bunch of workers. Are you the one who disappeared in the restricted area? How did you get out? A wry smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face. I don't know. I seem to have fallen unconscious, and now, I'm suddenly here. Do you remember anything? One of the workers asked. Tang Wulin shook his head in response. No. The worker then asked, do you sense any changes within your own body? Tang Wulin shook his head. The worker sighed. That's a pity. The myriad beast plane examination was meant to be a reward for all participants. Our spirit pagoda recently developed a soul spirit evolution method that can enhance one's soul spirits, and the longer one stays in the plane, the better the effect will be. Tang Wulin was quite surprised to hear this. Why is that? Would you need to kill the soul beasts in the plane to reap those benefits? The worker shook his head and replied, the myriad beast plane simulates the ancient soul beast habitat, but there are some different laws in there that can accelerate the growth of soul beasts and soul spirits. The longer one remains in there, the more they'll benefit. Tang Wulin was stunned to hear that the spirit pagoda had managed to develop something like this. He had indeed sensed the power of laws within that plane, but his soul spirits didn't seem to have been affected. Was this because he had encountered the Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape? In that case, the spirit pagoda had undoubtedly created another massive asset for itself. The myriad beast plane was going to be extremely alluring to all soul masters, and in conjunction with their man-made black soul spirits, it would be very difficult for the Tang sect to shake the position of the spirit pagoda in the Federation. With the time you've spent in the plane, you've received a perfect score for this examination. Please continue to the next examination, the worker said as he shook his head in a disappointed manner. Tang Wulin asked, would I be able to enter the myriad beast plane again? He still hadn't finished his conversation with the Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape yet, and he really wanted to know if he had made the right assumption. The worker shook his head in response. We don't have the authority to allow you back in there again. The myriad beast plane will be announced to the public at the conclusion of the event, and you'll be able to enter it for a certain price. Tang Wulin was rather disappointed, but also quite relieved to hear this, as this meant that he would at least be able to enter the plane again in the future, and he planned to do so with his friends. If this plane really could accelerate the growth of soul spirits, then it would be a monumental invention for all soul masters. It had to be said that the spirit pagoda really was doing a fantastic job. Tang Wulin inquired about the last two examinations and discovered they were only general tests that weren't really worth participating in, considering he had already accumulated more than 60 points. Thus, he decided not to participate in them, but nor did he leave the myriad beast plane. If his assumption were correct, then the Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape most likely wouldn't harm Lan Fozi. Lan Fozi had risked his life to try and save him from the almighty Sky Azure Ball Python and Titan giant ape, and Tang Wulin was quite touched by this gesture, so he was going to stay to make sure that Lan Fozi returned safely. Sure enough, after waiting for only a short while, Lan Fozi was also teleported out of the plane. However, she was still in an unconscious state. There's an unconscious one over here. He seems to have come out from the restricted area. Where are the medics? A group of medics immediately rushed toward her, but Tang Wulin held up a hand to stop them. Allow me. He squatted down as he spoke and gave Lan Fozi a gentle nudge while injecting a burst of mysterious heaven method soul power into her body. Lan Fozi hadn't sustained any severe injuries, so she quickly shuddered and reawakened. As soon as she caught sight of Tang Wulin, she reflexively threw her arms around her own chest. What are you doing? Get away from me. I'm helping you. Tang Wulin said as he rose to his feet with a resigned expression. Peculiar looks appeared in the eyes of the surrounding workers upon seeing this. What was going on with them? They were clearly both men. Only then did Lan Fozi realize that she had already exited the myriad beast plane, and she immediately stood up before departing after giving Tang Wulin a vicious glare. Tang Wulin also didn't want to be scrutinized any longer, so he hurriedly departed as well. Why are you following me? Lan Fozi grumbled as she stopped in her tracks. Tang Wulin replied in an innocent manner. I'm not following you. This is the only exit. Are you all right? Lan Fozi's expression eased slightly as she replied. I'm fine, but don't follow me anymore. You saved me once, and I returned the favor, so neither of us owes the other anything. From now on, we go our separate ways. See you never. After that, she quickly rushed away as if she were avoiding the plague. A wry smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face. He didn't even get a chance to ask her about why she was participating in this joust for a spouse even when she was a woman. Chapter 1479. However, he couldn't muster up any resentment toward her when he thought about how she had appeared to try and save him in that dire situation. At the very least, she was a good-natured girl who knew to repay the kindness of others. She was like the classic naive, pure, and sweet girl, except without the sweet part. His electronic badge was scanned to verify that he had indeed accumulated over 60 points. After that, he was assigned a number, and his opponent would be randomly drawn. He could return to participate in the elimination matches once all of the examinations were over, which meant that he had completed the first round of the Joust for a Spouse event. After departing from the Bright City Sports Stadium, Tang Wuling returned directly to the Blacksmith Association. He had thought that these examinations would only be a formality, but who would have thought that so many things would happen? Meeting Kyangyu's painting was to be expected, but it was quite a surprise to have encountered Lan Fozi. She possessed spirit domain realm spiritual power and was also a titled Douluo, yet didn't appear to be much older than him. The fact that he had never heard of such a prodigy before was very strange in itself. What was even more important was the discovery of the Myriad Beast Plane. If the Myriad Beast Plane really were as incredible as the workers proclaimed, then it would definitely create a massive stir in the Soulmaster world. All of the accusations levied against the Spirit Pagoda would most likely disappear as a result of the Myriad Beast Plane's release, and that was not something Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect wanted to see. At this point, it was basically proven that the Spirit Pagoda had played a direct role in the destruction of Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect headquarters, thereby making them sworn enemies. The Spirit Pagoda had to pay for all of the people that had perished during that tragic disaster, and the more powerful it became, the more difficult it would be to bring down. Furthermore, its influence was only growing in the Federation, and it had received the support of the government and military, so its position was virtually unshakable in the Federation. On top of that, he had discovered the Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape in the restricted area. When he had emerged from the Myriad Beast Plane, he had clearly heard the workers of the Spirit Pagoda mention the term restricted area, which meant that the area he had encountered the Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape in was a restricted one. This meant that the Spirit Pagoda hadn't managed to completely control the entire Myriad Beast Plane yet. In other words, the plane hadn't been invented by the Spirit Pagoda, they had merely discovered it. In that case, he was most likely right about the identities of the Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape, and that was a good thing. After establishing this clear train of thought, Tang Wuling immediately contacted the Heartless Douluo and Amorous Douluo using an encrypted soul communicator to inform them of all of this. The Myriad Beast Plane was undoubtedly going to become an important target for investigation for the Tang Sect and Shrek Academy. After that, Tang Wuling began to review the battles he had endured within the Myriad Beast Plane. The Sky Azure Bull Python and Titan Giant Ape really were incredibly powerful. In a one-on-one battle, perhaps he would have some chances. At the very least, he would have most likely been able to get away. However, he had virtually no chance in a one-on-two battle. Both the Giant Azure Claws and the Titan Giant Ape's massive fists struck him with an impression of invincibility. But who was the owner of the huge silver claw that had saved him in the end? And why were they helping him and his friends on more than one occasion? With all these mysteries hanging in the air, this Joust for a Spouse event was becoming more and more interesting. The examinations for the event progressed very smoothly, and as expected, the one that spanned the longest duration was the 8th examination. All of the Soul Masters that emerged from the Myriad Beast Plane quickly discovered the changes that had taken place within their own bodies. Everyone's soul spirits had evolved to different extents depending on the duration of time they had spent in the Myriad Beast Plane, and the weaker a soul spirit was initially, the more pronounced this effect was. Within the next few days, over 100 Soul Masters experienced their yellow soul spirits evolving to become purple soul spirits, and the entire Soul Master world was stunned. The Spirit Pagoda also took advantage of this opportunity to announce the existence of the Myriad Beast Plane. The Myriad Beast Plane was the Soul Spirit Law's plane. The Spirit Pagoda had announced that they had constructed the Myriad Beast Plane to replicate the prosperous Soul Master world of the past, thereby allowing Soul Masters to obtain a greater selection of better soul spirits. The Black Soul Spirits had been created on the basis of the Myriad Beast Plane, and now, the plane was in its second stage of development, and its enhancement effect had become very pronounced. The longer a soul spirit remained in the plane, the more they would be able to evolve, and most importantly, there was no upper limit. This meant that if a Soul Master could stay in the Myriad Beast Plane for a long enough time, they could even enhance their soul spirits to the 100,000 year level. Of course, this would require an enormous amount of time, but it gave all Soul Masters hope, particularly those who had reached cultivation bottlenecks. If their soul spirits could evolve, then there was a chance that they'd be able to break through those bottlenecks. Thus, the Myriad Beast Plane quickly became the center of attention of the entire Soul Master world. At the same time, the Spirit Pagoda had explained that the Myriad Beast Plane required a vast amount of resources and energy to maintain, so the number of Soul Masters that could enter it at once was limited. They also proclaimed that the Spirit Pagoda had expended an enormous amount of resources to create the Myriad Beast Plane in order to give back to the entire Soul Master world, and they implored all Soul Masters to ignore all fabricated rumors about their collusion with the Holy Spirit cult. As for when the Myriad Beast Plane was going to be released to the general public and how much the entry fee was going to be, the Spirit Pagoda declared that this information would be announced following the conclusion of the Joust for a Spouse event. As a result of all of this, the Spirit Pagoda's reputation was drastically improved, and it quickly became even more revered than it had been during its previous heyday. The Myriad Beast Plane had become a place that all Soul Masters yearned for, and the people who were unable to participate in the event due to age or cultivation rank reasons could only limit their ill fortune. The Spirit Pagoda had also announced that the Myriad Beast Plane would be opened to a limited extent in the future, and that more resources of all types were required to support its operation and development. Due to the opposition the Douluo Empire and Dou Spirit Empire had displayed toward the Spirit Pagoda, the supply of resources had been significantly hampered, thereby restricting the upcoming development of the Myriad Beast Plane. The Spirit Pagoda didn't directly say anything, but it was clearly blaming this on the Tang Sect. The Tang Sect had been declared to be a treasonous organization, and its conflict with the Spirit Pagoda was common knowledge. As such, the Spirit Pagoda was naturally going to try and stomp the Tang Sect even deeper into the ground using the Myriad Beast Plane as leverage. At this point, the Joust for a Spouse event would already be considered to be a resounding success, and those who knew what to look for could see just how many objectives the event was serving. However, the majority of people were blinded by the Myriad Beast Plane and the prizes offered by the Spirit Pagoda. Thus, all of the doubts and accusations aimed at the Spirit Pagoda disappeared virtually overnight. The parliamentary members that supported the Spirit Pagoda also began to strike back at their political enemies, and the Dou faction's voice was drowned out even further. It was under this tense political climate that the Joust for a Spouse event continued to progress. Less than half of the participants had been able to score over 60 points in the examinations, so most of the field had already been culled. This was a test of overall skills and abilities, so those who only excelled in one area were unable to progress. Chapter 1480. There were over 1,600 participants who reached the elimination stage. They were going to undergo 4 rounds of elimination matches, following which around 100 participants would progress to the round robin stage. Tang Wuling strolled along the streets of Bright City with his hands in his pockets, and he had to admit that it was truly a lively and bustling city. There were tall skyscrapers lining the streets, and many massive flyers advertising the Joust for a Spouse event. The name of Silver Dragon Princess Gu Yuna was becoming known to more and more people, but even as recently as 5 years ago, both he and Gu Yuna were completely unknown to the general public. How the times had changed. Tang Wuling was currently widely renowned due to his exploits in the Trail of 5 Gods, and Gu Yuna was receiving widespread attention due to this Joust for a Spouse event. Neither of them wanted to be famous, but they had no choice in these current circumstances. Never did Tang Wuling think that all of this would happen to him back when he first entered Shrek Academy over 10 years ago. All of a sudden, a large screen attracted Tang Wuling's attention. Many people were gathered under the screen, watching the examinations that had just concluded unfold. There were even some snippets of footage from the Myriad Beast Plane, which confirmed Tang Wuling's assumption that the Spirit Pagoda could monitor everything within the plane. However, judging from the images, this type of surveillance wasn't very clear. Come to think of it, they were most likely unable to see into the restricted area. Otherwise, the workers would have reacted differently following his ejection from the plane. Right at this moment, Tang Wuling's soul communicator began to ring. He accepted the call and was greeted by an extremely polite voice. Greetings, Your Majesty. I am the Secretary General of the Mecha Pilot Association. May I ask how much longer it'll take for you to reach our trial venue? Around 10 more minutes, Tang Wuling replied after glancing at the time displayed on his soul communicator. The elimination matches had already begun, but they were split up into several days due to the massive number of participants, and Tang Wuling's match was scheduled for the next day. On this day, the Mecha Pilot Association had invited him to demonstrate his Douluo lightning triangular circuit so he could officially assign the name to the skill. All right, we'll be waiting for you at the trial venue. After ending the call, Tang Wuling immediately picked up the pace. He wasn't traveling by car as he wanted to observe Bright City. He had anticipated the Spirit Pagoda's retaliation, and it didn't affect their overall plan. In reality, the Tang Sect and Shrek Academy's plans were progressing simultaneously, as expected of one of the largest associations in the Federation. The Mecha Pilot Association was far more grandiose than the Blacksmith Association, and the building was even larger than that of the Soul Master Association. After all, Soul Masters were limited, yet there were a vast number of Mecha Pilots. The trial venue was situated to the west of the city center in a building that resembled a sports stadium. The building was very large, and considering the land prices in Bright City, such a massive trial venue was a testament to just how wealthy the Mecha Pilot Association was. Tang Wuling had only just arrived at the entrance when he was immediately greeted by a worker, who then led him into the venue. The entire venue was constructed from metal, and Tang Wuling immediately sensed a force field as soon as he entered it. The worker introduced, the trial venue is situated in a very busy part of the city, so in order to ensure safety, this trial venue of ours has the highest grade of protective equipment in all of the Federation. The Federation has even tested many of its high-grade weapons here. The trial venue is split up into 3 areas, one for mecha weapons, one for general mecha testing, and one for high-tech weapons. I'll be taking you to the general mecha testing area. This was a female worker who appeared to be in her 20s, and her white uniform accentuated her alluring figure. She wore a bright smile, and her short brown hair was very clean and professional looking, but also rather alluring. Her eyes were very large and blue, indicating that she was a Bright City local. The Federation had been formed when the Douluo continent had crashed into the Sun Moon continent due to continental drift. Aside from the portion developed by the Tang Sect, the majority of the pieces of most advanced soul technology originated from the Sun Moon continent. It was exactly due to the advanced soul technology of the Sun Moon continent that the situation on the entire Douluo continent had taken a turn, and this was already over 10,000 years ago. The eye and hair color of the female worker both suggested that she had descended from a local of the Sun Moon continent. While she was making her introduction, she was also appraising Tang Wuling in a surreptitious manner. Tang Wuling was dressed in a very casual manner. He was wearing a pair of black pants and a tight-fitting black shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, revealing the silver dragon scale pendant around his neck. Aside from that, the rainbow bracelet was the only other thing that he was wearing. Even though this wasn't his true appearance, he had molded his Oolong character to be very handsome as well. However, what was far more alluring to the female worker than his looks was the fact that he was a titled Douluo and an exceptional mecha pilot. Judging from his appearance, he seemed to only be around 27 to 28 years of age, so he had a truly immeasurable future ahead of him. She was certainly not opposed to entering a relationship with such an outstanding man. Even if it didn't lead to anything, it would still be a fantastic memory, and if it did amount to something, then she would most likely be able to benefit from him. She had been very high-achieving and hardworking all her life, and she knew how important it was to take opportunities when they arose. Of course, she was very measured in her approach and was displaying a very good image to Tang Wuling. As Tang Wuling listened to her explanation, he was also inspecting his surroundings. In doing so, he discovered that the entire area was constructed from alloys that were comprised of many types of metals, and this was another display of the Mecha Pilot Association's enormous wealth. As they made their way into an open area, around a dozen Mecha Pilot Association members immediately approached them. Welcome. They were led by a thin and tall man who appeared to be in his 40s. There were some silver patterns on the uniform that he was wearing, indicating that he was different from the normal workers here. This was an oval-shaped area that was over 200 meters tall and spanned over a kilometer at its widest point. What was very remarkable was the fact that this massive space was completely isolated, and Tang Wuling could clearly sense very powerful energy fluctuations here. Greetings, Your Majesty. I am the Secretary General of the Mecha Pilot Association, Li Zeping, and I was the one speaking to you earlier. It's an honor for me to be able to witness your demonstration. Tang Wuling shook his hand with an indifferent nod. Let's begin then. Seeing as Tang Wuling had no intention of exchanging any further pleasantries, Li Zeping smiled and said, "All right, I'll get everything set up right away. Would you like to use your own mecha or one that's provided by us?" Tang Wuling replied in a nonchalant manner, "I'll use one provided by you to make things easier. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.